Hello, St John's, and welcome back for another chapter of the Roman Mysteries. We're now on scroll 13. Where are you taking us? Jonathan hesitated as they reached the green fountain that marked the end of their street. To the Marina Forum. The harbour master is my father's friend. He might know more about Avitus. But I promised my father he wouldn't leave the street. Jonathan shifted uneasily on the hot pavement. Come on, Jonathan, Flavia said in her most persuasive voice. Don't you want to find out who killed Bobbus? Of course I do, but father trusts me. He trusts you to help him, Flavia said softly. It won't take long, I promise. Nubia looked from one to the other. After a moment, Jonathan said abruptly, All right, let's get this over with. He set off down Fuller's Street at a quick pace, and the girls hurried after him. Apart from one or two slaves running errands for their masters, the whole town had gone indoors to seek refuge from the heat. Flavia and her friends were damp with sweat by the time they reached the marina gate. Through the marble arch, brilliant white against the azure sky, they could see the darker cobalt blue of the sea. The harbour master's name is Lucius Cartilius Poplicola, said Flavia, as they all paused for a moment in the cool shade beneath the arch. Flavia pointed to the left. I think he works there. The Marina Forum was an open square surrounded on three sides by a covered column-lined walkway. In the mornings and late afternoons, stalls set up in the shade of this colonnade did brisk business selling select goods fresh off the ships, fish, exotic fruit, jewellery, perfume, wine and fabrics. Now most of the stalls were closed for the long afternoon lunch. Only one or two remained open. Somewhere a flute warbled, and nearby a fishmonger was calling, Fresh squid, last of the catch, fresh squid, in a sleepy voice. At the far end of the square stood an imposing brick and marble building. His office is in there, asked Jonathan. I think so, replied Flavia, her confidence faltering. The door was guarded by a soldier on either side. Well, come on then, said Jonathan, and headed for the building. As the three friends hurried under the shady colonnade, past mostly empty stalls, the sound of the flute grew louder. Suddenly, Flavia felt Nubia grip her hand. Look, Nubia whispered. Behind one of the stalls stood a tall, handsome African. His skin was deep brown, like Nubia's, and he had the same neat ears and amber eyes. He was blowing into a little flute made of dark wood. The three friends stopped before his stall. On a large piece of peacock blue silk lay flutes of many different shapes, sizes and colours. When the flutist saw them, he put down his instrument and smiled with perfect white teeth. He addressed Nubia in a soft, fluid language. Nubia's face lit up and she replied in the same tongue. As she and the young man conversed, Flavia and Jonathan looked at her in amazement. Speaking her own language, she seemed completely different, confident and proud. Nubia and the man spoke together for a few minutes, and then the slave girl pointed to a small flute, like the one he'd been playing. The man smiled apologetically and said something to her. Then he turned to Flavia and Jonathan. The one she is asking about is made of lotus wood from my country. Very expensive. 1 gold piece. 100 sesterces. Flavia gasped. 100 sesterces was a soldier's monthly wage. Come on, Nubia, she said. You can come back and talk to him another day soon. Nubia followed the others towards the harbour master's office. She only looked back once. Avitus, bawled out the captain of the Triton to Flavia and her friends an hour later. He wouldn't hurt a fly. Very moody, though. Always writing poetry about dolphins and waves and sea nymphs. Laughing 1 minute, crying the next. Doted on that little girl of his, though. I've never seen anyone so affected by the death of a child. Flavia, Jonathan and Nubia were standing on one of the small piers of the marina watching a ship called the Triton undergo repairs. They hadn't been able to see Poplicola, but an ancient porter in the harbour offices had told them the name of Avitus' ship and when and even where it was berthed. Captain Alger was halfway up the mast of his ship, but his voice was so loud that they could hear him even over the jingle of tackle, the slap of waves against the pier, and the shouts of hammering of the sailors. Have you seen him recently? Shouted Flavia. Avitus? Captain Alger yelled back. No, he's on leave until tomorrow, and then we're off to Sicily again. We've been stuck here for 2 weeks trying to get our mast refitted. The old one was shattered in a storm. Most amazing storm I've ever experienced. Really thought we were going to Neptune's palace, if you know what I mean. All of us thanking whatever gods we believe in that we're alive, and no sooner does he step off the ship than he's greeted with the news of his daughter's death. Told me he wished he'd drowned in the storm and had never known what happened to her, poor little thing. The captain would have bellowed on, but Flavia hastily shouted her thanks and led the others back up the pier. Well, he didn't seem to think Avitus was dangerous, mused Flavia, but Libertus saw Avitus running with a bag and... Her voice trailed off as she considered the problem. A fishing boat had just docked and the fishermen were unloading the day's catch. Two lean young men, naked apart from loincloths and as brown as chestnuts, were carrying baskets of gleaming fish down a wobbly boarding plank. One of them nearly slipped and fell, but he regained his balance and leapt lightly onto the pier while the others cursed him good-naturedly. Nubia stared at the gangplank and shivered. It reminded her of the first time she'd been forced to board a ship at Alexandria. Venelicius had cracked his whip and forced them towards a narrow piece of wood which bridged the land and the boat. The gangplank rose and fell as if it were breathing, and Shanakda, a girl from her clan, had screamed hysterically and refused to go up it, alarmingly all the others without warning. Veneclius had furiously unlocked her collar and pushed her into the water, though her hands had still been tied. Nubia could never forget the sight of bitter seawater filling Shanakda's screaming mouth and silencing her forever. They had all been quiet after that, quiet and cowed for the whole voyage to Italia. Nubia shivered again and felt Flavia's arm around her shoulders. "I know you don't like boats, Nubia," whispered Flavia. "We'll go home right now." But as they turned left and started back towards the marina gate, Nubia saw a sight which made her heart pound. 3 large men were sauntering straight towards them. Nubia knew them immediately. Their faces appeared often in her nightmares. They were Veneclius henchmen from the slave ship. Nubia stopped short and looked frantically round, squinting against the glare of the sun on the water. The slave ship Vesper was berthed in the marina. She would know that hateful black and yellow striped sail anywhere, and there was Veneclius himself, leering at her from the deck with his one good eye. "Run for your lives!" cried Nubia. She gripped Flavia's arm tightly. "Venelicius has seen us and sent his men to capture us." "What? What about Veneclius?" Flavia frowned at her. Nubia suddenly realised she'd been speaking in her native language. Now she tried to remember the Latin for run, but her mind had gone blank. The men were getting closer. One of them was looking directly at her and smiling an evil smile. In desperation, Nubia pointed towards the men and then towards Venelicius. Flavia saw the slave dealer watching them from his ship and understood at once. "Run, Jonathan, run!" She grabbed his arm and pulled. They turned and began to run back along the waterfront away from the marina gate. Flavia first, then Nubia, then Jonathan. "Why are we running?" shouted Jonathan, leaping over a rolled-up fishnet. "Venelicius men are after us." Flavia dodged a sailor. "Who's Venelicius?" "Slave dealer," shouted Flavia. "If he catches us, he'll sell us on the far side of the world, where nobody will ever find us." She led them round a half-loaded cart under an unmanned customs stall and past the building site of the new marina baths. "Are they still after us?" Flavia called over her shoulder. "Yes," gasped Jonathan. Flavia's ankle started to ache and she realised Jonathan was wheezing. She had to find them some way of escape quickly. The marina piers were on the right. They'd be trapped if they went back down one of those. There were some brick warehouses on the left, but again, if they went into one of those, there may be no way out. The beach lay ahead of them, but there was suddenly no shelter there. Suddenly Jonathan cried, "I know where we can hide, follow me!" He turned and raced up the narrow alley between the last 2 warehouses on this waterfront. The alley was narrow and dark. It smelled of urine and vomit and worse. The ground was slippery with rotting fish scales and garbage. Flavia hoped Jonathan knew what he was doing. If he didn't, and if Venelicius men caught them, she knew the 3 of them would be tied up in the hold of the slave ship Vesper by that evening. Join me again for another chapter.